This is Tammy with Spoken Wines. Today we are taking you to the Barossa Valley in South Australia. Step into a world that goes back to 1843 and the first settlers planting grapes. Imagine savoring a wine from these vineyards that had become a legend. Brace yourself for a journey to Langmeil Winery, home to the oldest Shiraz vines on earth. Taste history that every wine-loving enthusiast must experience at least once in their lifetimes.
We love to share the history of Langmeil because Langmeil is part of the earliest European history, not only in the Barossa but in the state of South Australia. So our name Langmeil is a German derivative from a village that was here originally. And it was the village of the Long Mile in English translation, if you like. So it was a thriving metropolis of 12 families originally, spread along the river. South Australia is the driest state of the driest continent outside of Antarctica. So water was really important. And so these little farmlets is what they were. They operated under what was called the Hoofendorp system. So a hoof is a small farming allotment, dorf meaning village, so small farming village. And Langmeil was one road. It ran parallel to the river, the North Parra, and if you'd come along that road in the time of the village, you'd have found 12 hoofs, which were relatively narrow but deep farming allotments stretching from the road back to the river. Of the 12 families, the most significant to us was a family called the Oryx, because they occupied the land that we sit on today. The patriarch of the family at the time was Christian Oryx. Like all the others, he planted varied mixed crops, and quite indicative of how these little hoofs work. He had a few acres of some fruit trees, a few acres of some cereal grains, had a few livestock, and he planted vines. We've still got a few acres of Christian's original planted vines. So that's the humble beginnings of how the name arose, how the village came to be, and the beginnings of the wine industry. But as the Barossa still operates today, there's 60-odd wineries, from the really big ones to the little ones that people will never hear the names of, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because they make exceptional wine, but they're often doing it just for themselves, very small scale. But there are some nearly 600-odd growing families. So there's a lot of people make their living just growing grapes and selling to wineries. And that's how the Oryx family operated in the early years. There was no commercial winery on the property for 90 years. So generations of the Oryx continued to tend those vines and just grow the fruit and sell it up until 1932. And that's when the first commercial winery was established on the property.
So the Lindner family were part of the first sort of European settlers to the village of Langmeil. We came across this property in 96, and it was very much a property that was incredibly derelict, like run down, because it didn't really get through the 1980s, and no one wanted to spend any money on it. The whole place was collapsing, and these are buildings from the beginning of the European settlement to the region. If there's one gene I think the Lindner family have is this inherent gene to actually attract ourselves to things that need refixing. It's sort of like, oh my God, look at that. We need to go and fix that. And we've been here building and bringing this property back to life. And it's one thing to be able to preserve some of the original buildings and the original, sort of history, thinking that we're sitting in a building that was built by the, first and second generation of the European settlers to the region, but also in a pursuit of making fine wine, not only to sort of represent our region nationally, but also to represent, great wine internationally.
Christian Oryx on this block settled here in 1842. He planted vines the following year in 1843. We've still got just under 3.5 acres of Christian's original vineyard. We referred to it as the Freedom Vineyard because these people had come here for their freedom of faith. There is a book of the family history of the Oryx family, and it's called From Persecution to Freedom. So when we needed to name that vineyard and give the wine a name, it was your dad, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was James' dad, Richard, who said, that's what these wines are about. That's their foundation. We'll call it the Freedom Vineyard. And to this day, we still make a single vineyard wine from that.
Is that, it's our understanding and the belief that the Freedom of 1843 Shiraz is actually the oldest surviving sort of Shiraz vineyard in the world. And my brother Paul and myself, it's our role as sort of these custodians or caretakers of this vineyard is to get that old vine through to the next generation. My dad was a bit of a romantic in a lot of ways, and he'd always talk about the Freedom, being what is a glass of history. So the Freedom Vineyard is planted on what is the sort of the banks of the river. What is surprising though is that there's red clays there over like limestone. So when you look at a lot of some of these old ancient soils of the Barossa, they were seabed at some point. So you've got this limestone, and then you have like also these like red sands, and then you have like red, like not red but gravel, and then you've got another layer of red and then gravel. And so there's actually all these layers because of that taproot, because it's had to drive the root, drive to survive, down, it goes down through all of that strata, and then you get these side roots that sort of work off into the different layers of areas. This is where that sort of complexity and the layers of flavour come from. Depending on the season, the Freedom Vineyard can go anywhere from like 1 tonne to the acre, up to 2, maybe if we're lucky 2 point. I think we've seen like just over 2 tonne to the acre. When we purchased this property back in '96, Paul left his job, came to work for the property, and really started to fix it up, clean it up. And he's very meticulous. And this is if you're a winemaker, that is a pretty good thing. Meticulous is good. After the first vintage, my brother went to our dad and our uncle and just said, look, I really think I can make a better wine than this consultant. I'd really like the opportunity. And if there's one word that Dad taught both of us, it was the word persistence, right? So Paul just wouldn't let this go. He said, come on. And eventually they go, all right, look, you can make the wine from the old vines, right? He said, all right, cool, that's all I want. And so the 98 Freedom, he made that. And then 2 years later, it was entered into the Barossa Wine Show, and it ended up winning the best Shiraz in the Barossa Wine Show, the trophy. And then I think our dad now said, okay, Paul, you can make all the wines from now. Then you get 1 shot a year to make these wines. So really to understand the vineyard, understand the fruit that's coming through, you've got all this seasonal variation to take into account. It genuinely takes years. His journey of making the Freedom now, nearly, over the last 28 years, that experience is just invaluable and really underpins, I suppose, the pedigree of the wine itself. So it is a journey. When you look at that vertical, you can not only see that sort of winemaking evolution and how Paul has sort of adapted as he's gone along, making something, the best wines of his life right now. Obviously, if there was a year that wasn't up to scratch, you just don't make it. If there's one thing about reputation in the wine industry, it's very hard earned and it takes decades to build it, but it doesn't take long to lose it. So, it's actually sometimes the ones that you don't make that help to make your reputations. Langmeil wants to become recognised globally as a fine wine producer, a producer of some of the oldest vineyards or wines from the oldest vines from the world, but also, a steward and a custodian not only for us, but for the region, for the Barossa at large.
True to the region, true to the community, and true to ourselves.
Hi, I'm Tammy.
And I'm Jan.
Jan, walking through the oldest vineyard of the world was very emotional. It's humbling to walk along these and among these ancient vines. They're like sculptures of history. There is so much to share from this interview that we had at Langmeil that we captured in a separate, longer version where you can hear about things like the birth of the old vine chapter in the Barossa, the boom and bust cycles of the wine industry. But my favorite is about an orphan foster program that saved a 160-year vineyard.
Yeah, it's incredible. And you heard it here. Langmeil is the caretaker of what is believed the oldest vineyard in the world. Now, you might be wondering, how's that possible? What about like France and Italy or even the Middle East? And you're right, their history goes back for thousands of years. But it was the mid-1800s when this awful pest called phylloxera came in and wiped out all their vineyards. And they all had to be replanted with resistant rootstock. That pest ultimately also came to Australia, but never quite got to the Barossa Valley. And that's why you still today find some of these ancient vineyards that were planted by those first settlers back in the mid-1800s. Yeah. Now, Langmeil is doing something very special and very beautiful. They're making this single vineyard Shiraz from that oldest vineyard in the world. And the wine is beautiful. It has this dark fruit with layers of complexity, reflecting that terroir that James was talking about, and these layers of soils that the roots are tapping into. But you know what? There's more to that wine. When you drink this rich, complex wine, it is like this wine is trying to tell you the history that the vines had to go through over those 180 years. I mean, just think about it. This vineyard was planted only 22 years after Napoleon died. It was already 18 years old at the outbreak of the American Civil War.
Yeah, crazy.
You know, their dad said it best. You are drinking history out of a glass.
Yes, and it's so impactful too. I want to take a moment and talk about the Valley Floor Shiraz. This is a blend from 30 different vineyards of much younger wines. And it's a beautiful reflection of the Barossa Valley and the high quality of everything that Langmeil does. It gives you a great opportunity as well to experience the progression of the wine from this younger vines to the world's oldest vines that is richly expressed in the Freedom Shiraz.
Yeah, and don't forget about the Orphan Bank Shiraz. But you'll have to go to the long version to really hear this amazing story about that wine. You know, as Tammy said, you can experience a progression from wines made from a vineyard of 20 to 30 years old to the Orphan Bank, about 90 years old, to the Freedom Shiraz, a whopping 180-year-old. You can experience this all for yourself by going to our website, spokenwines.com, or just click on that link below and you can order them right there to get them delivered to your door.
Yes.
This is history in a glass.
Sure is. We are Spoken Wines.
Cheers.
Sure is. Well, we are Spoken Wines.
Cheers.
Cheers, dear.
Cheers, Demi. I feel like
You don't need to say that.
Let's do the cheering one more time. I'll say this in glass.